This story begins with our protagonist named Bojji, a young prince who promises his mother to be the best king of all after his father Bos, who is the current king. However, his life is not easy as he is a deaf-mute child, making it difficult for him to communicate with others. This condition affects him to the point that while walking through the forest, a strange shadow named Cage intercepts him to attack. But as the child cannot speak or understand what is being said, the shadow merely steals his clothes and forces him to return to the same spot the next day to steal from him again, to which Bojji accepts without a problem, showing his complete obedience to Cage and demonstrating that for the first time in his life, he was able to perfectly understand someone's words. Or so it seemed, because the next day the child meets Cage again to give him his clothes one more time, and the latter does not hesitate to mock and insult him upon learning that he is deaf-mute. But he later regrets it when he sees that the people of the kingdom also mock the child for his condition, including the castle guards where he lives, although the child does not pay much attention to them. In the castle, we meet the second queen named Hyling, mother of the second prince named Data, who, upon seeing the protagonist without scolds him and is willing to send him to the gallows, although after the child explains to her that he is without because he was playing with a friend, she retracts. But that doesn't prevent her from thinking that Bojji is an incapable prince to become king, which leads her to make several hurtful comments about him, and when he retires and goes to his room, he begins to cry inconsolably, showing us that even though he doesn't understand the words, he knows what people think of him. Cage, on the other hand, noticing all this, begins to feel empathy for Bojji, and when he tries to approach him to talk about this, the child leaves, so he sets out to find him. In the middle of his search, the dark being is intersected by Bibin, Data's sword-handling tutor, who doesn't hesitate for a second to want to end him, knowing he belongs to the Shadow Clan. In this way, these two have a confrontation that ends with Cage slipping into the shadows after throwing a dagger at Bibin. On the other hand, our little protagonist goes to see his father, King Bos, who, although in the past was the strongest man this kingdom could know, capable of defeating several monsters without anyone's help, nowadays he is quite ill and worried about his kingdom, especially about what will happen when he... For this reason, he entrusts his loyal swordsman named Domus to Bojji to train him and become a strong prince capable of taking over the leadership as the next king of this kingdom. Thus, Domus begins to train the child, but he is disappointed to see how the boy is not even able to grip the wooden sword properly. But when Data appears during the training to teach Bojji how to fight, Domus is truly impressed by the skills of the second prince. At the same time, this motivates our protagonist to decide to face Data, and to everyone's surprise, the child dodges all of his brother's attacks and is even able to give him a small blow to the head, demonstrating that all in all, he is someone intelligent and fast, and not someone slow and empty-headed as everyone believed him to be. In a completely different scene set in the past, we can see how the Shadow Clan is pursued and attacked by the Light Clan, whose only survivors are Cage and his mother. The latter, fearing the worst fate for her son, asks him to flee as far as he can, while she confronts the Light Clan. In this way, the Shadow Woman sacrifices herself for the welfare of her son, which gives him time to escape until he meets the young countess named Poise, who is with her father, and together they help Cage hide from the members of the Light Clan. After the little shadow was out of danger, Poise and her father must continue their journey, so the Lord recommends to Cage that he seek refuge in the kingdom opposite to Bossi's. Thus, Cage takes refuge in the shadows of said kingdom and cannot help feeling for having lost his mother forever. To make matters worse, this feeling of sadness is combined with hunger, and since he doesn't have money to pay for even a tomato, he decides to steal it, but the merchants give him what he deserves. However, luck comes to him later when he meets a vagabond, who is willing to provide him with food in exchange for him doing what he orders, which the child accepts without hesitation. One of the vagabond's orders is for Cage to steal money, something the child manages to do without problem, as he is literally a shadow child who can slip through small openings, and he does not seem to be against the vagabond's order, as he was the only one who helped him when he arrived in this kingdom, and his way of thanking him is by granting him his complete obedience. Although this was in vain, as the next day, the Light Clan raids the vagabond's house to take care of the child, as they know he is here because the vagabond himself revealed Cage's location. Fortunately, he manages to escape from them once again, and the next day he returns to the vagabond's house to live with him again, although the latter no longer wants anything to do with the child, as he no longer needs him either to steal money or to ask him for any other orders. However, Cage does need him, as the vagabond practically became his family after helping him when no one else did, and for this reason he follows him everywhere. This is a bad idea, as he witnesses firsthand the vagabond's, which causes him to become sadder than he already was after losing his mother, so he has no choice but to leave the place. For this reason, Cage becomes a cold and emotionless being, who will focus from now on in fulfilling his job as a treasure thief. In the middle of one of his jobs, he coincidentally meets our little protagonist, and we relive the moment when Cage steals his clothes from the child, which led to them meeting for the first time. Now, returning to the present in the midst of the confrontation between Data and Bojji, the latter continues with his strategy, which is to dodge all attacks and attack the opponent unexpectedly. Although this strategy works quite well for him, Domus does not like it, as it is not fitting for a king. For this reason, the man, through sign language, tells our protagonist to change his passive strategy for a more courageous one, which was a bad idea, as the child is not able to even hold a simple wooden sword because he is weak. He ends up being easily defeated by Data. Because of this, Bojji is taken to the infirmary and Cage follows him, hiding in the shadows. Once here, while the child rests, he begins to remember that several people, including his brother Data, consider him weak and cowardly. That is why he gets up from bed with great effort to go towards a sword and try to hold it, just to prove to himself and others that he is a strong boy. Faced with this, Cage emerges from the shadows to stop him and tell him that it is not necessary for him to prove to be someone strong as he already is. Additionally, he lets him know that his fighting strategy is very good and he does not have to change it, as that makes him unique and special. After saying all this, Cage is ready to accompany the child and be his right hand from now on, showing himself willing to help and protect him from anyone who dares to mistreat him. Faced with this, our little protagonist cries a lot, but not of sadness, out of happiness, as for the first time in his life, he will have a friend who will really support him. The next day, the entire kingdom learns of some bad news. King Boss has... In his will, Boss left the throne in the hands of our little protagonist, something we already knew. What we didn't know is that who ends up being chosen as the new king is Data, something that surprises Bojji, but all this has an explanation. It turns out that it was all planned by Queen Hyling, as she didn't want Bojji to be the new king, so she suggested having a vote with the important members of the kingdom. In the vote, only 2 voted for Bojji to be the new king, Epias and Sandio, while the others voted for Data to be the new king. In this way, Data is crowned king, which makes our protagonist very sad, so much so that he decides to leave his brother's coronation. To rub salt in the child's wound later, Bibin tells him that his friend Cage had to leave the kingdom and go to a distant place. Strangely, Bojji doesn't feel bad about this, as he remembers that Cage promised to always be by his side. For this reason, the child searches throughout the kingdom for his friend with no success, so he ends up going to a cave where he finds a giant snake named Mitsumata, who the child has known for years as he is Bibin's servant. Bojji, through some drawings on the ground, asks Mitsumata if Bibin has anything to do with Cage's disappearance. The snake answers affirmatively, although he cannot say much as he cannot disobey his master Bibin's orders, so he just lets the child know that Cage is okay, wherever he may be. On the other hand, Bebin tries to end Apias' life on King Data's orders, although he is the one who ends up losing his life as he did not count on Apias being very skilled. Not for nothing is he nicknamed the King of the Spear. Returning to our little protagonist, he explains to Queen Hyling that he must make a very important trip to see his friend, to which she refuses, but she does so with such strong comments that hurt the emotional sensitivity of the child, causing him to start crying. Bojji decides to make the trip anyway, although he must first leave his room, and since the guards are ordered to prevent him from leaving the castle, the child comes up with a brilliant idea of escaping through the window. Obviously, this was a bad idea, as when the queen discovers him, she panics and does not hesitate to bring him back to the room with the help of her bodyguard Dorshi. Things worsen with Dorshi's help, as our little protagonist ends up falling from a great height, and when he finally touches the ground, we see that he is completely injured and... Faced with this, Hyling makes use of her healing powers to heal the child and bring him back to life, demonstrating that she does care for him, even if she doesn't show it. With great effort, the queen manages to heal Bojji, although she ends up completely exhausted, so she is taken to her room to recover. Delving into the past of the latter, she used to try to approach Bojji several times, only that the child always ignored her, since the death of his blood mother, he does not tolerate people, much less someone who wants to take the place of his mother. All this changed when Hyling used her healing powers to save the child's pet snake, which led to them becoming closer and more united from that moment on, almost like mother and son by blood. But this closeness went down the drain when she gave birth to Data, as from then on, she began to mistreat the protagonist, making comments that affected the child's emotional stability. In the present, the queen decides to change her ways with Bojji and allows him to make the trip he so desired, only on the condition that Domas and his low-ranking knight named Hokuro accompany him. This sudden change of attitude takes the child by surprise, so he doesn't hesitate to give her a kiss on the cheek as a thank you. As for the queen, although she allowed him to travel, she has a feeling that something bad will happen to Bojji during his journey. Years ago, Domus is chosen as the sword tutor for our protagonist by order of King Boss, which is good news for him, as he will be in charge of training the next king of the kingdom. However, he ends up completely disappointed by Bojji's physical ability and limitations, as although he is just a child, he is a child who leads a more difficult life due to his condition. Nevertheless, this did not limit him from feeling empathy for him, to the point that he grows fond of the little one, promising to protect him at all costs, no matter what happens. In the present, Domus keeps his word by protecting Bojji during the long journey they are undertaking. But not only does he protect him, but also Hokuro, although being a low-ranking knight incapable of following Domus' simple orders, loses sight of our little boy. The worst part of this is that when Hokuro finds the child, he sees him in a fetal position, as if he were, which obviously scares him, although it turns out that the child was only asleep, which reassures him. The problems do not end here, as because Bojji fell asleep, his personal bag was stolen, and when they notified Domus, he reprimands them, especially Hokuro, as he had given him this simple order to protect the child, and he could not believe that he could not fulfill something as simple as that. Fortunately for everyone, the next day, Bojji finds his bag in the middle of the road, so he takes it and they continue with the journey. In the midst of this, the child gets distracted by a butterfly, so following it, he ends up falling into a pit with stakes, which although could have ended his life, luckily did not, as the child was able to slip through the stakes. After this, the child enters a mysterious cave he finds in the place, where he is aggressively greeted by a hunter. Faced with this, Bojji pleads with him to have mercy on him and not to hurt him, which the hunter agrees to do, as after all, his goal is to hunt animals, not humans. Or so it seems, as after eating the animal he caught, he is ready to hunt our little one, as he believes that he will run out of easy prey like animals in the coming days. For this reason, the child moves away from him, and to his luck, he finds Domus and Hokuro. So once reunited with them, they decide to leave the place, mainly because our little one is afraid that the hunter will end up hunting him. This is precisely what happens later while the child tries to eat, as two daggers almost his head, if it weren't for the piece of food he was eating took its place. This piece of food falls to the ground and is stolen by an animal, which takes it to provide food for its offspring. The downside of this is that the next day the animals lost their life, as it turns out that the daggers embedded in the food were poisoned. For this reason, the child becomes sad, so Hokuro consoles him to make him feel better, and he does it not only out of obligation but because he truly cares for the child, since in the past he comforted him when he lost his mother. To give the deceased animals a well-deserved eternal rest, the protagonist and Hokuro bury them, and the latter lets the child know that the animals will be fine in the afterlife. This moves Domus, and he asks Hokuro what he means by the afterlife. Hokuro has no answer to this question, however, Domus does. He lets both Hokuro and Bojji know that the afterlife is the underworld, the place they are currently heading to, as the man wants to show the child the gates of the underworld to teach him more about life on Earth. Although in reality, all this was part of his plan to end the child's life, as we see how he pushes him towards the underworld and laughs evilly for having fulfilled his mission to end Bojji's life. On the other hand, in a strange scene, King Data accidentally opens Pandora's box, causing his surroundings to become dark and surrounded by evil creatures. Then a small version of Bojji emerges from the box to protect his brother at all costs, and even though the child is injured by the attacks of the creatures, he does not give up, as his mission to protect his brother at all costs gives him strength and endurance. All this scene turns out to be just a dream, which served for Data to realize that our protagonist is stronger than him, and for this reason he asks his magic mirror to provide him with all the power of his deceased father, Bus. Returning to the moment when our protagonist is pushed by Domus into the underworld, luckily, he doesn't lose his life, as it turns out that when he was falling, someone activated a grappling gun from his backpack, which allowed the child not to fall into the flames of the underworld. To his surprise, that someone who activated the gun is none other than Cage. In this way, these two reunite after several days without seeing each other, and neither of them can help but cry inconsolably, as they feel happy to see each other again after so long. Cage tells the child that he has actually been by his side all this time, as it turns out that Bebin ordered him to protect him at all costs, something that Cage has fulfilled so far, saving the child on several occasions. First by preventing his fall from the top of the castle, then by scaring off the thief who stole his bag, and finally by preventing him from eating the poisoned meat. He told him all of this so that he knows that someone wants to see him underground, especially those he considers his allies. This really saddens Bojji, as he remembers that Domus wanted to end him, and he wonders if anyone else in his family wants to do the same. Seeing the child sad, Cage suggests going down to the underworld, as there they can meet someone who can make Bojji very strong and imposing so that he can defend himself from anyone who tries to hurt him. In this way, the two venture into the depths of the underworld, where Cage is frightened to see several human remains, while Bojji, on the other hand, begins to smell a strange odor. This smell comes from the gas from the depths of the underworld, which is a sign that the flames are about to emerge. For this reason, they decide to move away as far as they can from the flames, but since the gas is so toxic that it limits the circulation of air for the two, they fall to the ground unconscious. On the side of King Data, he enters the lowest floor of the castle, as there he can obtain the power of his father. Data is accompanied by two servants of the late King Bojji who activate a machine that turns Bojji into a digestible liquid. This makes the child nauseous as he cannot believe that his father's body has been transformed into a mere liquid all in front of his eyes. This liquid is combined with the blood of a giant bird, along with a gem of his body's ashes, resulting in the ultimate elixir that will provide Data with all the power of his father. The child is not sure whether to take this elixir, as the mere combination of these ingredients is repugnant to him. Furthermore, he considers that he can become stronger on his own without having to resort to absorbing his father's power. Faced with this, the magic mirror tries to convince him by telling him that if he drinks the elixir, he will rise in the ranking of kings and he could become the king of the whole world. The child is not moved by these words, as he wants to remain faithful to the idea that he can become strong and rise in the ranks of kings on his own. However, the magic mirror does not intend to allow it, so he orders Bojji's servants to take him by force and force him to drink the elixir. But thanks to the child's great fighting skills, he is able to defeat the servants, and after this, he decides to throw the elixir to the ground, remaining faithful to his ideals. Returning to our protagonist and Cage, they are taken to the underworld castle, where they are healed of the wounds from the toxic gas by none other than the king of the underworld named Desha, who has suspicious intentions with Bojji. On the other hand, Hokuro learns that Doma's pushed the child into the underworld, so he does not hesitate to want to defeat him as he feels that he failed as a protector of Bojji's well-being. At the confrontation between these two, Hokuro manages to part of Doma's hand, although shortly after, the latter delivers a strong blow to Hokuro's shoulder, leaving Hokuro out of action. And despite this small victory, Doma feels truly guilty for having pushed the protagonist into the underworld in the first place, so he finishes his hand, demonstrating remorse for his evil act towards our little protagonist. Returning to the underworld castle, Desha formally introduces himself to Bojji, and Bojji does the same, but it's Cage who speaks for him. Because of this, Desha can't help but laugh at the child, not only for being a weak child, but also for being a deaf mute who depends on others to communicate with others. Setting this aside, Cage informs Desha that they came here with the goal of turning our little protagonist into someone strong. And while the king has the power to do this, as he is in second place in the king's ranking, he hesitates to make the child strong because he doesn't see potential in him. Even so, he gives the child the opportunity to demonstrate his skills by facing off against the captain of the Underworld Order. Cage is frightened by this, as he knows that the members of the Underworld Order are known for being strong and imposing, so he fears that the child will be injured. Luckily for Cage, the captain does not harm Bojji, as he only sees him as a defenseless child, which puts Bojji in an embarrassing situation, causing Desha to decide not to fulfill his request to make him strong. Cage does not intend to leave empty-handed, so he asks the child to demonstrate his defense skills as he knows he is good at it, and hopes that with this, King Desha will fulfill the child's request. In this way, the protagonist agrees to be attacked by the captain, and he is truly impressed by the child's agility in dodging each and every one of his attacks. This is not enough for Desha, because although the child proves to be an expert at dodging attacks, he lacks the ability to attack and defeat the enemy. And it is because of this lack of skill that he finally decides not to make Bojji strong. So he orders the Underworld Order to expel the child and Cage. Despite this rough moment, the child does not intend to give up and commits to becoming strong on his own, starting by lifting a small rock, but as he is not even able to do this simple action, he becomes sad and starts to cry. The captain of the Underworld Order feels sorry for him, so he decides to help him by recommending to Cage that he visit Desha's younger brother named Despa, as he believes that he could help him with his goal of becoming strong. In this way, Cage and our little protagonist set out in search of Despa. On the side of King Data, in the midst of an argument between him and his magic mirror about the issue of King Bojji's elixir, suddenly Appease bursts into the scene to try to end the child's life. However, he stops upon hearing the voice of the mirror saying stop, as he recognizes that this voice belongs to Miranjo, a strange woman who in the past helped him become a high-ranking member for the kingdom, although she did so in an unorthodox way. Setting this aside, the man asks Miranjo why she is trapped in a mirror, to which she responds with another question, which is why he wanted to end Data's life. Appius tells her that as a trusted member of Boss, he had the task of fulfilling his will by making Bojji the king of this kingdom, and what better way to do this than by ending Data? Faced with this, Miranjo tries to explain to him that doing this will only bring problems, and while this happens, Data takes advantage of Appius' distraction to try to end him. However, Morandjo lets the child know that he doesn't have to end the man's life, as after explaining the whole situation to him, she decided to set aside her mission to end him. This is what seemed at first as when Data lets his guard down. Appiah's hits the child so hard that he knocks him unconscious. This was not planned by Appiah's, but by Morandjo herself, who did all this to force the child to drink from Bojji's elixir, as she knows that this drink will not make him stronger, as it actually has another effect that we currently do not know. On the side of our protagonist and Cage, they travel through the entire underworld until they finally reach Despa's house. And when the latter opens the door, they are surprised to see that it is not as they expected, as his physical appearance is very different from Desha's. The issue here is that Despa is a rather physically attractive man, which causes envy in his brother Desha, since he has a not very friendly face, to say the least. Setting this aside, Cage reveals to him that the reason they came to visit him is for him to help the child become strong, and he trusts that he will be able to do this without problems, as he knows that in the past, Despa helped a mere mortal become a powerful king. Faced with this, the man explains that although he can help Bojji become stronger, he needs him to do his part by believing in himself and not allowing the words and mockery of others to affect him. This is how the little protagonist accepts this condition with much emotion. However, Despa doesn't intend to help him for free, so he asks him to compensate him with money. Cage gets angry about this, but in order to help the child, he decides to give Despa a bag of money, as well as a bag with several expensive gems, which causes the man's eyes to sparkle, demonstrating his great interest in money. Minutes later, Despa begins his assistance to the protagonist, using his great power to see things that mere mortals cannot see. In this way, the man detects that the child lacks physical strength, and that no matter how hard he tries to train to become strong, he never will be, since his muscles are and always will be weak. This makes the child quite sad, but luckily, Despa lets him know that he will help him in another way, as he also detected that the child is skilled and has a lot of potential inside him, and therefore he is determined to train him and make him the most powerful king in the world, although they will have to wait until the next day. When this day arrives, the child is the first to get up, as his enthusiasm to become the most powerful king is so great that he begins to clean Despa's house and incidentally cooks something for him and Cage. Upon tasting the child's food, these two grimaces in disgust as the food tastes really bad, almost making them vomit, although for Bojji, his food seems like a complete delicacy from the gods. This is because the child is the son of Bos, who is a giant man, and these giant men have the ability to eat everything without having any negative effects on their digestive system, and it seems that, somehow, Bojji acquired this unusual ability. For this reason, Despa and Cage agree not to let the child be in charge of the kitchen, since even though he can eat what he cooks, they cannot. A little later, our little protagonist's training is about to begin, but first, he must choose his ideal. The problem with this is that all the are large and heavy for the child's strength, even a small axe. Suddenly, the child looks up and decides to choose that, which we do not know what it is, but Despa agrees that that is perfect for the child. Weeks go by, and the child trains hard in a room alone with Despa, something that raises doubts for Cage, as he wonders what they will really do, because after the training, the child is so exhausted that he has to be taken to bed. All these doubts are cleared up when on one of those days, Cage manages to see that Bojji was able to cut a huge rock on his own, which impresses him greatly. On the other hand, King Data wakes up and heads to his throne, but this is not the King Data we know, it is actually King Bos, who reincarnated into his son's body after he drank from his elixir. In a short flashback, we are shown that King Bossi made a pact with a demon in order to become the strongest man in the world. But in exchange for this, he had to offer his own life or that of a family member. Bos does not intend to lose his own life for a pact, and since he has no family, he decided to find the strongest woman in the world to make her his wife and thus have a child, who will be the sacrifice for him to become the strongest man in the world. The downside to this is that when the child is born, Bos feels guilty for making the pact, so he founds an entire country and becomes its king, in order to give the best life to his child, as the guilt of knowing that he is doomed to lose his life very soon consumes him. Returning to the present, Hokuro and Domas have a strong argument where the latter reveals to him that he had to eliminate Bojji by order of King Data. Additionally, he mentions that it is not a good idea to return to the kingdom without the child, as it is most likely that Queen Hylang will make a fatal decision. This is exactly what happens when Hokuro returns to the kingdom and notifies the queen that our protagonist has, as she is so shocked and moved by the news that she makes the tough decision to have him executed. At this unprecedented moment, all the soldiers prepare to execute Hokuro, and he has no choice but to cry and await his dignified. Fortunately for him, Domas arrives just in time to save him and confront the soldiers, and although he succeeds, shortly afterwards he is easily defeated by King Data, who is actually King Bos, only in the body of the child. Data tells everyone present that Bojji didn't lose his life, which surprises them, especially the queen. But how does he know this? It turns out that when Data asked Miranjo who the strongest person in the world was, she replied that it was none other than Bojji, which made him understand that he is still alive. In a completely different scene, we see that Bibin is still alive after the fight he had against Apias some time ago, only he was very injured. Fortunately, the giant snake Mitsumata will take care of his health. Back in the kingdom, Data, after telling everyone that Bojji is still alive, also tells them that he has become stronger, as he has been training in the underworld. Shortly afterwards, the child approaches Domas to entrust him with the mission of destroying the portal to the underworld located in the lowest part of the castle. But since he lacks his right hand, he decides that he will do the mission together with Hokuro, although he must first teach him about sword handling. Then Data approaches Queen Hyling to confess that he is actually Bose in Data's body, and while confessing this, the real King Data is lost in the limbo, wondering where he is and tries to find a way out. Upon Data's confession, the queen initially thinks the child is playing a joke on her. However, when he demonstrates his strength by crushing a weapon into metal, she begins to believe that the child's confession is true, as King Bose himself did the same when he first met her. For this reason, Hyling asks where the real Data is, to which the child responds that he doesn't know his whereabouts, nor whether he's alive or not. Faced with these words, the queen faints and is taken to her room, where she cannot rest, as all she can think about is what might have happened to her son Data. Meanwhile, Dorshi, the queen's bodyguard, senses the presence of monsters outside the room. When he goes to confirm his suspicion, he is not surprised to see the enemies and prepares to defeat them. Before this, he begins to recall his past. Originally, he was not Hyling's bodyguard, but a mere soldier who wanted to be her protector. When King Bose denied him the position, he took it upon himself. Despite the queen considering him incapable and weak to be her bodyguard, she eventually allowed him to do so, as thanks to him, Bojji was able to establish a good relationship with her after the death of the child's mother. This memory motivates Dorshi so much that he is filled with energy and strength to defeat the monsters. However, the heavy armor he wears hinders his movement, so he decides to remove it. This proves to be a bad idea, as it leaves him completely exposed, and all he accomplishes is being mercilessly attacked by the monsters. Although this seemed to be the end for Dorshi, his motivation to protect the queen leads him to use his last strength to defeat the monsters. While he succeeds, he ends up falling unconscious due to losing a lot of blood from the monster's wounds. However, he survives as Hyling herself takes care of healing him with her restorative powers. Now reunited, she expresses her intention to defeat Bose, as she wants to reclaim her son Data. She wastes no time and goes to Bose's office to confront him personally. Despite her reproaching him to return her son, Bose insists he doesn't know what happened to him. Suddenly, she hears her son's voice, so she begins to search the place and realizes that the child is inside Bose. For this reason, she doesn't hesitate to ask Dorshi for help to literally open the king's body and free her son. This seems like a crazy idea to him, while the soldiers look at the queen confused, thinking she's mad. Dorshi refuses to assist her, but as she refuses to stand idly by, she takes out a knife she had stored to try to open Boss's body, although Dorshi stops this act, reminding her that the body she's trying to open is that of her son Data, even though he no longer lives in it. After this scandalous scene, Dorshi knocks out the queen to avoid further problems with Bose and then leaves. Meanwhile, the real Data begins to suffer from anxiety, knowing that no matter how hard he fights to get out, he won't be able to escape the limbo he's in. He wonders if his brother experienced the same feeling at some point in his life. On Bojji's side, once he officially finishes his training with Domas, he's ready to return to the kingdom. But before that, the man wants to celebrate the boy's great achievement with a buffet, something that makes the child happy, so much so that he doesn't hesitate to showcase his learned skills. The downside is that, in doing so, he accidentally reveals the weapon he chose, which is a simple fencing sword. This sword is so thin and delicate that Cage starts to believe the boy didn't truly become strong, and he doesn't hesitate to reprimand Despa for not fulfilling his deal. Bojji feels sad about this, so Despa advises him not to pay attention to Cage or anyone else who considers him weak, as he and only he knows how much effort he put in these weeks. The man is very sure that the boy learned a lot and considers him truly strong. This is precisely what the protagonist demonstrates hours later during the buffet, when some monsters calling themselves the Aben brothers begin to hurt him and Domas. Although the man remains calm initially, his patience wears thin when one of the brothers offends him with evil words, leading him to strike the monster. As a consequence, the rest of the Aben brothers start attacking Despa, and they manage to catch him off guard. Fortunately, our little lad springs into action to defend him, but most of it is showcases learned skills. First, the child demonstrates his physical resilience by taking a strong blow from one of the brothers, which doesn't even faze him. Then he showcases his hand-to-hand combat skills by giving the monster a small punch, which at first seems to have no effect, but after a few seconds, the monster falls to the ground completely weakened because the boy learned to detect his opponent's weaknesses. To conclude the demonstrations, the boy finally demonstrates his sword skills by knocking out the monster with a simple attack. This last part has an explanation. Despa had the boy study the human body, as it is known that the body functions by the circulation of from the heart to the brain. If this weren't the case, the body would start to fail and lead to just like what happened to the monster our protagonist attacked with his sword. After demonstrating all these skills, Cage is truly impressed and has no words to thank Despa for turning his friend into someone very strong. Later, when Despa moves away from the protagonists, we see him reunite with the Eben brothers as if nothing happened, indicating that all the demonstrations of the boy's skills were nothing more than a farce orchestrated by Despa to make the boy believe he became strong. While this is partly true, it's not entirely the case, as Bojji at least managed to learn how to dodge attacks from his opponents, although he learned this from Mitsumata some time ago. In a conversation between the protagonist and Cage, the latter tells him that the kingdom is in chaos, as he knows from Bibin that there are people in the kingdom who want to end the boy's life. This comment worries the child too much, so much so that he begins to think that the people who want to end his life are his family, especially Queen Hailing, which leads him to cry. To calm this sadness, the boy hits himself several times to try not to think about it, because after all, he must return to the kingdom obligatorily. In a short flashback, we see how Bojji and Data were very close brothers, only that the latter was forced by their mother to become strong to protect Bojji at all costs, and he succeeded with the help of his magic mirror. The downside to all of this is that the boy trusted that mirror too much, leading him to where he is now, in a limbo with no way out. Continuing with the flashback, Data feels that Bojji is being overprotected and wonders if he will be able to live a long life, as he doubts this will happen due to his brother's physical condition. For this reason, Bebin takes Data to the village, where he shows him that although Bojji is weak and dependent on others, he is sure that he will become strong over time. How does he show this? By pointing out a man who has worse physical condition than our little protagonist. With this, Data understands that while he is physically strong, his brother is mentally strong, as he did not let himself be defeated by what others thought or said about him because of his condition. Back in the present, while Data was thinking about all of this, he suddenly sees a strange girl in the distance, so he approaches her and asks for her help to get out of limbo. However, the strange face of the little girl scares Data, and to make matters worse, several people appear out of nowhere to warn the boy that this girl is a monster, as she ended their life. Because of this, Data moves away from the girl and begins to be afraid of her. But when he sees that her mask falls off and she can't pick it up because she doesn't have hands, the boy doesn't hesitate to help her. At that moment, he manages to see the real face of the girl, which scares him even more, and this time he thinks about distancing himself from her definitively. But as much as he would like to do this, his kind heart doesn't allow it. It turns out that the girl has a disfigured face and hands because the people who called her a monster were the ones who left her like that for no reason. As a consequence of finding out about this, Data confronts those people and is determined to protect the girl at all costs. After this, the boy introduces himself formally to her and promises to be by her side from now on, as he would love to leave Limbo with her. To our surprise, the girl introduces herself to the boy as Miranjo, that is, the human version of Data's magic mirror. In the underworld, King Desha senses that something bad has just happened, so he heads to the dungeon to verify if his feelings are true. Unfortunately, his intuition didn't fail him, as the bad thing that just happened is that Auken, the commander of the Underworld Order, better known as the Sword King, has just escaped from the dungeon, which is clearly bad news for Desha, and for this reason he decides to send the captain and the warriors of the Underworld Order to head to the surface and capture Auken. Although this decision is more of a political one, as Desha is using the excuse of capturing Auken only to take over Boss's kingdom. On the side of our little protagonist and Cage, after these two thank Despa for all the help he gave them, they are suddenly intercepted by the captain and the warriors of the underworld, who notify them that Boss's kingdom is about to be attacked by a group of powerful underworld members, including Auken. After giving this warning, the captain forces the boy and Cage to go with his group to the kingdom to deal with the wrongdoers, although he can't help but feel bad knowing that this whole plan's a farce, as the real mission Desha gave him is to take over Boss's kingdom. While our protagonists travel to the kingdom, Queen Hailing, after returning from a small trip, does the same, as she had been notified that King Boss was captured, and she, knowing that the body Boss is in is that of her son Data, didn't hesitate twice to return to the kingdom. Refreshing our memory, Cage reminds us of everything that has happened with him and our protagonists so far. It all begins with their first encounter, where Cage steals the boy's clothes and he doesn't oppose it, as he likes to help others, believing it's something worthy of a king, which is exactly what he wants to become. Faced with this, Cage sees no future for the boy, as besides being deaf and mute, he's a bit clumsy, although this perspective changes when he sees him confront Data, being truly amazed by the boy's defensive skills. From that moment on, Cage decides to accompany the protagonist everywhere, not only because they become friends, but also by order of Bebin, who gave Cage the mission to protect the boy, as someone wants to end his life. In this way, Cage hides in the boy's bag without him knowing, and thanks to this, he's able to save him from a fall into the depths of the underworld. Cage not only limited himself to protecting the boy, but also set out to help him become stronger, and the boy achieved this because his friend took him to Despa, who took care of transforming the boy into someone very strong, and precisely because of this, Bojji feels capable of facing the wrongdoers approaching his kingdom. This brings us back to the present, where the captain and the members of the Underworld Order take Cage and Bojji to their kingdom, and as they head there, Cage tells the boy about the situation. It turns out that someone was involved in the escape of Alkin and the other wrongdoers who are about to attack the kingdom, and that someone is none other than Miranjo, although since she couldn't do it alone being a simple mirror, Appease helped her. Knowing this, the protagonist becomes really sad, so Cage, to dispel these feelings in the boy, tells him that at least Despa will help them deal with the wrongdoers. This makes Bojji happy. However, the captain of the Underworld Order tells them that it will take Despa time to catch up with them, as his means of transportation is his noble steed named White King, which, although in the past was the fastest steed in the underworld, after separating from Despa, it gained weight and lost its speed. Leaving this aside, in Boss's kingdom, he is captured and taken to the dungeon by the wrongdoers, and after this, one of them named Kimbo proclaims himself king. Alka doesn't like this, so he decides to confront him, and he does it in a painful way, as he first uses his powers to freeze Kimbo, and then his limbs, causing the man to lose and be unable to do anything. The only thing Kimbo can do in the face of this is wait for his while Alkin watches him leave this world. After this, another wrongdoer named Zaku proclaims himself king, only this time Alkin doesn't oppose him. Zaku's first action as king is to dispose of Kimbo's body, which is found hours later by Bebin, who is preparing to bury him, unaware that he seems to still be alive. On the other hand, Queen Hyling along with Dorshi and her soldiers finally arrive at the kingdom, where the first thing they see is Apis holding Miranjo, who reveals to them that the of Bossy was her idea, as she wants to bring ruin to the kingdom for reasons unknown. Due to this, Dorshi begins to believe that Miranjo was responsible for ending the life of the former queen Sheena, as he remembers hearing rumors about this. Seeing Apis holding Miranjo, Dorshi asks if he is on the side of the mirror, to which Apis responds yes, as he swore his complete loyalty to her some time ago. Then Apis sends several monsters to attack Dorshi and the other soldiers, which is no problem for them as they easily defeat the monsters. The real problem arises when the wrongdoers make their appearance to complicate things, and their move works well, as they easily defeat the soldiers and Dorshi, leaving Queen Hyling completely alone and vulnerable. Fortunately, the queen is not entirely alone, as she's accompanied by her trusted soldier named Anne, who will protect her at all costs. Although Anne does a good job at first, she is easily defeated by the powerful Alkin, which enrages the queen so much that she uses her blinding light technique to drive the man away, and it works quite well. After this, she uses her healing powers to heal Anne, but unfortunately, she runs out of energy and power, and to make matters worse, the monsters corner her, leaving her as an easy prey. While this seemed to be the end for Hyling, to her surprise, Apis betrays Miranjo by throwing his spear at the monsters, which gives the queen time to escape, but as she has a good heart deep down, she takes the time to take Anne's body with her. Upon this, Apis knows that the queen won't be able to escape at this pace, so he awakens Dorshi with a loud shout, and after this, the man wakes up seeing Hyling in danger, and he uses all the strength and energy he has left to deal with the monsters, but after a few seconds, he ends up on the ground being slowly by them. Seeing this scene, Apis feels bad for Dorshi and tries to go help him. However, Miranjo forbids him, which leads Apis to ask why she wants to end the queen and her soldiers. Miranjo responds that the reason she does all this is because she wants to help Boss become the eternal king, and as she knows that his family is just a hindrance to achieving this goal, she must get rid of them. On the other hand, Oaken begins to cause disturbances in the village by taking the lives of several people, including the soldiers of the kingdom. Fortunately, the protagonist, Cage, and the Underworld Order arrive just in time to deal with him. The first to confront Alkin is our little hero, but unfortunately, the captain forbids it, as Despa specifically ordered him not to allow Bojji to face Alkin. Due to this, the captain sends the boy to go to the castle and take care of protecting the queen, while he and the rest of the soldiers will deal with the wrongdoer. Returning to the kingdom, Appease and Miranjo escape from there and head towards the underworld. However, the wrongdoers rebel against them and begin to attack. One of them confronts Appease, while the other takes Miranjo with him. The wrongdoers did not count on Miranjo being a magical mirror with enough power to turn into pure gold, nor did they count on Appease being a very strong and loyal man to Miranjo, putting them in complete danger. Luckily for the wrongdoers, King Zaku appears at the exact moment to establish peace between them. However, this was nothing more than a distraction strategy to end Appease and take Miranjo with him. Dorshi, on the other hand, fights for his life and Queen Hyliang's life trying to defeat the monsters. But no matter how much effort he puts in, the monsters overpower him. This saddens the queen greatly, so she doesn't hesitate to use her healing powers to save him. And she managed to do this because Mitsumeta appeared just in time to defeat the monsters, which gave Hyliang enough time to completely heal Dorshi. But not everything is rosy, as Mitsumeta is attacked by one of the wrongdoers who leaves him nearly, if not for Bojji arriving just in time to knock out the wrongdoer. Seeing Mitsumeta lying on the ground almost lifeless, the boy asks the queen to save him. However, she tells him she can't do it as she spent all her energy healing Dorshi. The protagonist thinks this is the end for Mitsumeta, but luckily, Cage pulls out some energy potions he had saved and gives them to the queen to save Mitsumeta. In this way, Hyliang takes the potions and starts using her healing powers, but then the wrongdoer wakes up and moves to attack the queen. This is prevented by our little protagonist who, using the skills learned from Despa, is able to destroy the wrongdoer's giant hammer and then render him unconscious with a simple blow to the foot. This epic scene leaves Hyliang speechless, as she can't believe how strong Bojji has become during the time she was absent, considering he couldn't even lift a simple glass of water before. The boy, seeing that Hyliang completely healed Mitsumeta, gives her a tight hug, which he momentarily thought wasn't reciprocated, but to his surprise, the queen returns it, causing the boy to finally feel Hyliang's love and affection, reminiscent of the love and affection he received from the former Queen Sheena. After this, Hyliang approaches Cage to try to find out his intentions with her son, but as she feels a malevolent aura emanating from him, she orders Dorshi to arrest him. However, Mitsumeta explains that Cage was with Bojji the whole time to protect him and ensure he makes good decisions, putting Hyliang in an embarrassing situation, and since she doesn't plan to apologize to Cage for the misunderstanding, she asks Dorshi to do it for her. Our protagonist, seeing the lifeless monsters, feels sad for them, so the queen, seeing the boy in that mood, doesn't hesitate to use her powers to heal the monsters, and thus make the boy happy. Then, unexpectedly, the wrongdoer wakes up and moves to attack them all, but upon seeing Bojji, he feels fear and decides to lower his guard, showing that he respects him. Faced with this, the boy is surprised, and as a king's protocol, he names the wrongdoer as his loyal soldier, to which he agrees not without revealing his name first, which is Jigen. In the village, Alkin finishes off all the soldiers of the Underworld Order and is about to finish off the captain. However, an unexpected lightning bolt sent by Desha incapacitates him, and after this, Despa comes out of nowhere to arrest him. It turns out that he and Desha plan for Alkin to defeat as many people and soldiers in the village as possible to have a clear path to take over the kingdom of Bossi. This plan worked quite well as we see Desha preparing to attack the kingdom in the underworld, entering through the castle's secret entrance. For this reason, Cage tells Bojji that they must take care of destroying that entrance. However, Mitsumeta mentions that Domus is already on his way to do this, as King Bos had ordered him to do so some time ago. Cage recognizes that this is a good opportunity for their group and Domus to join forces to destroy the entrance, although our little protagonist doesn't think it's a good idea, as ever since Domus pushed him into the underworld to end his life, he doesn't want to see or be near Domus. Faced with this, Cage advises him not to worry, as he, Jigen, and the other monsters are by his side, and they don't intend to leave him alone with Domus. This makes the boy happy, so he decides to go destroy the entrance to the underworld. Moving towards the entrance to the underworld, the first to arrive are Domas and Hokuro. Within seconds of arriving, the entrance opens, and on the other side, the Underworld Order approaches. Domas doesn't intend to let them burst into the castle, so he uses all his strength to defeat them, and he does so very easily, even managing to defeat the strongest member of the order named Subicade. With this, all dangers seem to have been eradicated, or at least that's what it seemed. As for Hokuro's bad luck, he ends up cornered by a mysterious soldier, who came accompanied by King Desha himself. Desha came with the aim of confronting Bossi and taking over the kingdom, and he knows he can easily defeat him since he's not as strong as before, now being in the body of a child. Domas doesn't intend to let Desha commit this act, so he stands in his way and plans a good strategy in his mind to defeat him. However, this strategy goes down the drain when Desha delivers an unsuspecting and painful blow to his, leaving him out of combat. Even so, Domas manages to get up and stand, showing his willingness to defend Bos, even if it cost him his life, as he has nothing to lose since he betrayed Bojji by pushing him into the underworld. Hokuro, on the other hand, manages to defeat the soldier who had him subdued, and after this, he shouts to Domas that he will go help him. This was the worst thing Hokuro could do, as it only caused Domas to be distracted, resulting in Desha taking advantage of this moment to disarm the man, leaving him completely vulnerable. Fortunately for Domas, Bojji, Cage, and Jigen arrive at the scene, but when they see the underworld order, Desha, Hokuro, and Domas himself, they don't understand what they are all doing there. Domas and Hokuro start crying upon seeing the protagonist, as they can't believe he's alive, and the boy, upon seeing Domas, can't help but feel awful, as he not only starts crying, but also starts hitting himself, a sign that he feels resentment and hatred towards Domas. To calm the boy, Cage takes him by the hands and says some nice words, but this doesn't work entirely. For this reason, Domas also wants to help the boy feel better, and he does so by trying to take his own. Although this resilient body doesn't allow him to. Still, Hokuro worries about him and lets him know that the best thing he can do now is to fulfill his initial role, which is to protect Bojji at all costs. In this way, Domas and Hokuro join the protagonist group and help them defeat the underworld order. And while they take care of some, Jigen does the same, making sure to protect the most vulnerable, namely Bojji and Cage. However, Desha uses his powers to unleash a bolt of lightning at Jigen, knocking him unconscious. Bojji doesn't intend to stand idly by this, so he prepares to take on Desha, but Domas stands in his way as he wants to try to redeem himself and give his life for the boy's forgiveness. Before facing Desha, Domas asks him why he came here, to which he replies that in addition to defeating Bojji and taking over the kingdom, his true motive is to end the life of the woman who freed his prisoners and the mastermind behind all the disaster that led them all to this point, which is Miranjo. When mentioning Miranjo, Bojji begins to recall his past, where we see Miranjo ordering his soldiers to mercilessly attack the kingdom. Shayna, the boy's mother, didn't want to see her son before her eyes, so she decided to protect the child, even if it cost her own life. Although Shayna in that moment, so did Miranjo, as her soldiers betrayed her and ended her life. This memory saddens the protagonist, but he sets aside this feeling as he must focus on the present. Here, Desha orders the capture of Jigen, as he is a criminal, something the boy didn't know. Desha explains to him that in the past, Jigen betrayed him in order to save a little boy of their same race, but it didn't help much as he ended up being captured by Desha, who didn't hesitate to take the life of the little monster to show Jigen that one should never betray their superiors. Bojji doesn't care if Jigen is a criminal or not, as he considers him his friend and he is willing to give his life for him, something the boy demonstrates by saving him from an attack of lightning from Desha. Faced with this, Desha communicates with his brother as he doesn't know what to do with the boy who is interfering with his plans. Despa tells him to leave the place as he is no match for Bojji, much less for Boss, and therefore the best option is to resort to Plan B, which is to make Bojji face Boss on his own. Desha thinks this is a good idea, so he agrees with his brother's request, and after this, he decides to leave the castle, not without taking Jigen with him, forcing him to join the underworld order, and even though he doesn't want to, he must do it. Before leaving, Jigen bids farewell to the boy very kindly, telling him in sign language that he will always be grateful to him for saving him from Desha. On the other hand, Domas and Hokuro beg for forgiveness from the protagonist, and upon this, the boy begins to cry and runs away from the place as he feels so much hatred for the two of them after their betrayal that it will be difficult for him to forgive them. For this reason, Cage decides to follow him, and to make him feel better, he suggests a little race to the top of the castle, which the boy accepts, putting aside his sadness and focusing solely on playing with his friend, something that makes Domas and Hokuro happy, who witness the whole scene. In the village, Alkin manages to free himself and prepares to unleash a new chaos. Delving into the past of the latter, we learn that he is the son of the previous king of the underworld named Saturn, who was a god who sought immortality by having children with a human. Saturn not only had Alkin but also Desha and Despa, and although they all possessed some of their father's power, when he loses his life, the only one who obtains the power of immortality is Alkin. Over time, this drove the man mad to the point where he lost his sanity and even his soul. For this reason, his brothers were forced to imprison him in a dungeon, where he did not stay long as Miranjo freed him, leading us to the present moment. Here, our protagonist and Cage return to the surface, and the first thing they see is a man lying on the ground, whom Cage recognizes as Apias, so they do not hesitate to take him to the queen to be healed. However, the man wakes up as if nothing happened, and seeing that the boy wants to take him to the queen, he tells him that he cannot go to her because he explains that he is at odds with her because he is allied with Miranjo and she intends to end the queen's life and destroy the kingdom in order to be happy with Bossid, whom she secretly loves. After saying this, Apis recommends to Bojji to leave the place to avoid further problems, but Cage opposes the idea of the child doing this, which leads the man to raise his fists to confront them. Apis easily gives up when he feels the great power emanating from the child, surprised by how strong he has become. For this reason, he decides to clear the way for him and not be an obstacle, hoping that Bojji, with all the strength and power he now possesses, will save the entire kingdom, and also hoping that he will save Miranjo, to whom he owes his life. In a brief scene, we see Domas and Hokuro finally destroy the entrance to the underworld, and after this, they plan to return to the surface to help our protagonist. Returning to the kingdom, King Zaka finds himself cornered by the sudden arrival of Auken, who, having no soul, is being controlled and manipulated by Miranjo to end Zaka himself and the other wrongdoers. The best decision Zaka makes in response to this is to flee the scene, leaving his comrades behind. However, our little protagonist arrives just in time to stop the man's escape, and he, feeling the great power of the child, surrenders easily. Or so it seemed, because this was just a strategy to lower Bojji's guard and attack him with poison. Unfortunately for Zaku, his poison does not affect the child, as he, being the son of a giant, is resistant to it. For this reason, Zaku has no choice but to flee once again, but since the child does not intend to allow this, he uses his sword skills to knock him out and then arrest him. Oken reappears on the scene and prepares to confront Bojji, and the latter does not hesitate to want to knock him out as well. This is a bad idea, as the child does not know that Auken is immortal and could easily defeat him. But despite not knowing this fact, to everyone's surprise, Bojji manages to dodge all of Auken's attacks and is even able to land several sword strikes that the child thought would knock out the enemy. To his surprise, Auken is still standing, and he laughs at the child for not knowing that he is immortal. Nevertheless, the child continues to attack him and manages to break his sword, leaving him completely vulnerable. Unfortunately for our protagonist, Auken restores his sword using his and laughs at the child, knowing that he will never be able to defeat him. Still, the child continues to try to defeat him by any means necessary, knowing that if he doesn't, his people will be in danger. For this reason, Cage jumps into the scene to tell the child that Auken is immortal and asks him to stay away from him as much as possible. The child obeys and leaves the place. However, when Auken approaches Zaku to finish him off, he returns to protect him. In another part of the kingdom, Apis is found by Queen Hyling, and seeing him badly wounded, she uses all her power to heal him. After recovering, Apis plans to return to Miranjo to help her, which is considered treason to the kingdom. However, Hyling allows it, as she knows that no matter what happens to Apis or Miranjo, she believes her son Bojji will save the kingdom, sensing an aura of hope in the child, the same aura she felt when she first met Bossi. Shortly after, Domas and Hokuro arrive at the scene, and the first thing they do is apologize to the queen for attempting to take Bojji's life. To their surprise, she forgives them without any problem, but she orders them to protect the child with their lives, something they accept without objection, as they know they owe him that. On the other hand, Bos frees himself from the dungeon and wants to explain Bebin why he holds Miranjo in high regard. It turns out that she belonged to the Huma Kingdom, where only mages with enough power to face the supreme gods lived. In a confrontation between Miranjo's father and Bos, the latter emerged victorious, and although it seemed that Bossi was also going to lose his life, Miranjo's mother, with her great heart, used her powers to heal him. For this reason, Bos decided to make alliances with the Kingdom of Huma, helping them to confront the gods, and while doing so, he watched Miranjo grow, and he grew fond of her for the kind heart she had. Even with Bos's alliance, the Kingdom of Huma still couldn't defeat the gods, and as a last resort, it turned to ally with the distant Kingdom of Yakuza. The downside of this was that the people of the Kingdom of Huma did not know that the people of the Kingdom of Yakuza were evil, even after they taught them magic and good values. To make matters worse, the Kingdom of Yakuza did not hesitate to betray the Kingdom of Huma in order to ally themselves with the supreme gods, as they saw that they were more powerful, and this resulted in them facing the Kingdom of Huma, taking all the lives they can, including Miranjo's mother and herself. Returning to the present, our protagonist saves King Zaku from being eliminated by Auken and prepares to confront him to defeat him once and for all. Unfortunately, the boy ends up tired and powerless, and he becomes frustrated for not being able to defeat Auken. This leads the enemy to attack with everything and eliminate Bojji from existence. However, the captain of the Underworld Order and Despa arrive just in time to stop this. This way, our little one is out of danger, but he can't help feeling bad for not being able to defeat Auken, so Despa, to make him feel better, tells him that he did a good job holding Auken long enough for them to take care of him. After this, he communicates with Desha to have him send a lightning bolt to Auken to render him unconscious, But to his surprise, the subject manages to counter the lightning like never before, and after this, he heads towards Despa to finish him off. Faced with this, a captain of the Underworld Order intervenes to prevent Alkan from harming Despa. However, he is easily defeated, and after this, Alkan manages to seriously injure his brother. As a consequence, our protagonist fills with hatred and jumps into the scene to attack Alkan with all his might, managing to destroy his sword and helmet, leaving him almost out of commission. But as Alkan is immortal, he quickly recovers and attacks Bojji. This left the child injured, and Alkan prepares to defeat him forever. Seeing that his friend is in grave danger, Cage rushes as fast as he can to help him and uses his entire body to increase his volume to devour Alkan. The latter was a bad idea, as Alkan is so strong that he completely destroys Cage's body, which makes our little protagonist very sad. On the other hand, continuing with Miranjo's story, Boss explains to Bibin that when he found her completely disfigured and without hands, he became so enraged with the people of the Yakuza kingdom that he annihilated them one by one, and after this he took Miranjo to an acquaintance to be healed. Although this person was able to heal her, the girl had to use a facial prosthesis for the rest of her life, which caused her great trauma since then. Returning to Bojji after seeing his friend eliminated from this existential plane, he becomes quite sad, but as he has no more strength to fight, Alkan mercilessly ends him. In this way, Cage, Bojji, and Despa lose their lives, and there is no hope left for the kingdom. However, Miranjo brings out the good heart she once had and uses her magic to try to heal them all. This leads them to a plane between life and death, where we see that the protagonist and Despa are okay, waiting for Cage to join them. Unfortunately, Cage has the priority of going with his deceased mother to the afterlife. It is not until Miranjo appears to reason with him that he changes his mind, and although he doesn't understand the reasons why she helped him remember that he must return to the existential plane to help Bojji, he thanks her. These words lighten the girl's heart, causing her injured hands and face to return to her body, and after this, she disappears, indicating that she was finally able to redeem herself from her actions, although she left Data completely alone in limbo. On the other hand, Alkan continues to cause problems because after defeating the protagonist, Cage, and Despa, he now tries to end Mitsumata's life, but this is prevented by Bebin, who arrived just in time to stop him. Bebin didn't come alone, as he came accompanied by Domas, Apias, and Dorshi, who are referred to as the Big Four. Between Domas' sword skills and Dorshi's brute strength, the Big Four managed to lower Alkan's guard, no matter how immortal he may be. Faced with this vulnerability, Alkan thinks about how to free himself from Dorshi, and remembering his brother Despa's wise fighting advice, he manages to free himself and attack the Big Four with all his strength, leaving them extremely weak. Despite this, the Four do not intend to give up so easily, as they are not only the Big Four, but also the last bastion that can stand up to Alkan, and precisely for this reason, they use their last strength to try to defeat him or at least neutralize him. In the realm between life and death, our protagonist sees his mother Sheena in the distance and can't help but cry, remembering that she sacrificed her life for him. She, on the other hand, argues with Miranjo, wanting to know the reasons why she acted so wrongly all this time, being a person of good heart. Miranjo explains that she did what she did to be with Boss, as she values him greatly. Additionally, because she made a pact with a demon to transfer her soul into a mirror, she had no choice but to act malignantly, as the demon told her that when her life ends, he will devour her soul. After this explanation, Sheena better understands Miranjo's perspective. However, she lets her know that, due to her bad actions, she will spend the rest of her life alone, unlike Bojji, who managed to make many friends and allies who would give their lives to protect him. Understanding this, Miranjo becomes so enraged that she uses her magic to disappear from the plane they are in, leaving only her, Bojji, and Despa. These two discuss what to do with the girl, unsure whether to make her pay for her misdeeds or not. Despa teaches the boy a little about Miranjo's past, and he can't help but cry upon seeing all the suffering the girl endured. Therefore, they decide not to judge her for her actions. Instead, they plan to help her redeem herself, but Despa knows that will be an almost impossible task, as if the girl gave her soul to a demon, there's nothing that can be done. Returning to reality, no matter how much the Big Four strive to defeat Alkan, his immortality is so strong that he can overpower them. Thus, Damas, Dorshi, Apias, and Bibin are knocked out of the fight. Fortunately, Hokuro arrives just in time to help them defeat the enemy. The downside is that Hokuro is just a low-ranking soldier, so he ends up being easily stunned by Alkan. With all this, the hopes of defeating Alkan are slim, if not for Despa and Cage coming back to life. Although Cage is completely healthy, Despa and our protagonist are not, as they are losing a lot of. Because of this, Despa tells Cage to go to the captain of the Underworld Order, who knows a special technique to stop the. Unfortunately, the captain is by Alkan, and Cage lets out a loud scream, catching Alkin's attention and directing him towards him to finish him off. Faced with this, Bojji, with the little strength he has left, stands up and is determined to protect Cage at all costs. Just then, Boss appears to strike our little protagonist, rendering him unconscious, and then does the same to everyone present. He does this to gather everyone in one place so he can use the healing powers he inherited from Queen Hyling to heal them all. In this way, Bojji and the others come back to life, this time with much more energy, so much so that they feel they can defeat Alkin this time. However, Boss decides to confront Alkin himself, and to everyone's surprise, he easily defeats Alkin because his body takes time to regenerate, allowing Boss to destroy him over and over again and then trap him inside a large rock, preventing him from recovering. The problem with this is that Boss has proven to be a heartless being, someone who doesn't care to see his enemies suffer no matter how much pain he feels. For this reason, our little protagonist decides to confront him. Before this, Boss approaches Miranjo to explain that everything he did for her during this time was in vain, as they will never be able to be together as before. Miranjo becomes saddened to hear this, as while Boss remains alive in the body of Data, her soul is trapped in a mirror, from which she can never escape. After this, Boss stands imposingly before Bojji and the others, telling them that he will spare their lives if they swear loyalty to him, and if not, he will be forced to destroy them one by one. Faced with this, Bojji wisely decides to confront his father. As much as he loves him, he loves his brother Data more, and he will not hesitate to face his father to get him back. Luckily for the boy, the Big Four are on his side and are determined to protect him at all costs. The first to try to do this is Domas. However, our little protagonist knocks him out with his skills, as he doesn't want his friends to get hurt by Boss, as he knows that he is so strong and he believes that he and no one else can defeat him. Thus, the long-awaited confrontation between Boss and Bojji begins, where, although at the beginning everything seemed to go wrong for the boy after getting into a good rhythm, he manages to destroy Boss's, and not only that, but he also manages to lower his guard, leaving him completely weak, something that impresses Domas, as he can't believe how much his little pupil has learned in such a short time. With nothing more to lose, Boss approaches Miranjo to destroy her forever, but this is prevented by our protagonist, who acted just in time to stop this act. Ironically, Miranjo herself asks Bojji to destroy her, as she has nothing more to fight for in this life. Besides, Boss is willing to leave Data's body and accompany Miranjo to the afterlife, or well, to a place much beyond the afterlife, since we remember that both their souls belong to a demon. Bojji decides to heed Miranjo's request and destroys her. In this way, her soul and Bossi's are free, but just at that moment, the demon appears to devour both souls, although the only one he was able to devour is Miranjo's. While Boss's soul goes to the afterlife, Miranjo's soul goes to a world of eternal suffering and pain, where all she can do is watch as the demon devours the souls of others while she waits for him to devour hers. In Limbo, Data begins to see the memories of Boss and Miranjo, where these two were very close, almost like father and daughter. Bossi was always by her side, protecting her from everyone, even from herself, as she had the desire to end her own after losing her mother. Still, she was able to overcome this trauma and lived happily with Boss, and even though they had different dreams, she was willing to help him fulfill his wish. On one of those quiet days, Boss confesses to Miranjo that his greatest desire is to become the strongest man in the world. This confession took the girl by surprise, as she knows that if Boss fulfills his dream, she won't be able to be by his side. Still, she was willing to help him fulfill that dream just to see him happy. Miranjo took Boss to a cave where the demon who granted people's wishes resided, and after Boss told the demon his dream, the demon told him that he would fulfill it with the only condition of taking the life of his unborn child in return. Faced with this, Data thinks that unborn child is his brother, but while he is in Limbo and Bojji is in the real world, he knows that unborn child is himself. After seeing these memories, Limbo begins to fragment and disappear, and after a long time, Data returns to the real world, hearing his father asking him to save Miranjo. As soon as he wakes up, Data sees the demon, and before facing him to save Miranjo, Despa, with the help of his brother Desha, summons a lightning bolt that paralyzes the demon, and after this, the captain of the underworld orders him. With this, the demon becomes vulnerable, so Despa tries to ask him the wish of bringing his brother Alkin back to life. However, Data shouts his wish from afar, which is to bring Miranjo back to life, leading the demon to fulfill the child's wish and not Despa's. The demon brings Miranjo back to life, and after this, he disappears. Data approaches Miranjo to hug her and meet her in person for the first time, and to everyone's surprise, he falls completely in love with her, so much so that he asks her to be his wife, and he is willing to forget all the bad things she did, which clearly brings tears to the girl. Those who do not intend to forget all the damage caused by Miranjo are those from the underworld. For this reason, the captain approaches the girl to end her life, But to his misfortune, the Big Four stop him. Despa, for his part, remembers that Alkin told him that it is not yet his time to return to life, and precisely because of this, he decides to spare Miranjo's life, but not before asking Data to compensate for the damages with some money and jewels. This decision to spare Miranjo's life regardless of Alkin not being ready yet was solely Despa's decision, and when the captain mentions that he should ask Desha's opinion, Despa is terrified. To his surprise, Desha accepts his decision without much trouble, only asking them to come back with a very large loot. Minutes later, Queen Hyling arrives with her soldiers at the scene, and the woman, upon seeing that her son returned to his body, does not hesitate to hug him as well as to hug Bojji, as she can't believe how strong they have become all this time, as despite this, she still sees them as babies. At that moment, Hyling notices the presence of a woman, to which Data explains that that woman is none other than Miranjo, the one responsible for imprisoning him in limbo and the mastermind behind all the disaster that led them to this moment. By pure logic, the queen demands the immediate execution of the girl. However, Data tells her that Miranjo will be his wife, causing a great cry of surprise in Hyling, as she did not expect this plot twist. Data explains to his mother that although Miranjo caused all the problems, he, as a true king, is willing to forgive her and start a new life with her. The girl can't help but cry at these warm words, and looking at the sky and seeing how the souls of her mother, Queen Sheena, and King Boss approve, indicating to her that being by Data's side is the new path she must take to find her happiness and that of others, she decides to redeem herself and pay for her sins by making others happy while finding her own happiness. This happy ending for Miranjo brings joy to everyone, and Data, still being a king, apologizes for being the cause of everything, as if it weren't for his pride and wanting to be the strongest of all, none of this would have happened. Although this makes everyone happy, seeing how Data is a worthy king, our protagonist doesn't feel comfortable with this, as the entire journey he took to become stronger was to become a king. Luckily, Data gives him his place, making the boy happy, but he feels incapable of being a good king since Queen Hyling made him lose confidence in himself from a young age. Similarly, his confidence reappears in the boy when Cage makes him see that he sees a good king in his eyes, and thanks to this, our protagonist accepts to be the new king, and as a result, the Big Four pledge their loyalty to him. The latter find it a good idea to celebrate the boy's coronation, and to begin, they try to lift him into the air. The downside of this is that the boy feels they want to harm him, so he doesn't hesitate to dodge them all. However, when Cage tells him not to worry as everyone is loyal to him, Bojji allows himself to be lifted and thrown into the air, making him feel like he's finally in heaven, as he could fulfill his goal of being king after a long time and effort. Cage, on the other hand, feels he has completed his mission with the protagonist, so he decides to step aside even though he doesn't want to. However, he knows he has to do it because, according to him, Bojji no longer needs him. In the king's throne room, while the soldiers pledge their loyalty to the protagonist, he feels the absence of his best friend, so he puts aside the soldier's oath of allegiance to look for Cage. The boy asks Domas and Hokuro for help in finding his friend, but even with this, they are unable to find him, so all that's left for Bojji is to wait for his friend to return, and while waiting for this to happen, he finally puts on the crown. Unfortunately, a new threat arises as King Bo returns to cause new problems. Ironically, King Bo returned only to free Alkin and confront him, as he wants to return the favor Alkin once did to him. King Bo cuts Alkin's head and throws it into the sea, and after this, he considers that now they are even, so he leaves the place without further ado. Days go by, and our little protagonist carries out his duties as king as he should, only doing them in a disheartened and subdued manner as he misses Cage very much. Because of this, Hyling approaches the boy to explain that a king has the duty to make others happy and never show concern, sadness, or distress, as that will only worry his people. On Cage's side, he builds a small wooden house and sets out to find work in the village to build a new life. The downside is that Cage completely forgot that he belonged to the Shadow Clan, so no one wants to hire him for any job, and they even destroy his cage. Faced with this, Cage doesn't intend to give up and convinces himself that tomorrow will be a better day. While sleeping on a giant rock, he has a dream where he sees Bojji playing with him, but when he wakes up, he feels sad knowing that it was all a dream. But to his surprise, the boy appears before his eyes, and with this reunion, they both start to cry. The protagonist explains that he left the throne and handed it over to Data because Queen Hyling explained to him that although a king has the duty to make his people happy, if he is not happy himself, then it is better that he is not king and follows the dream that makes him happy, in this case being with Cage. After this, the boy comments that he doesn't intend to give up his dream of becoming king because he wants to be king, but from scratch, that is, with a new kingdom founded by him. In this way, Cage decides to accompany the boy on this new path until he sees him become king of a new kingdom.